Welcome to the Primitive Podcast. I'm Cade, your host, and in today's episode, we had the privilege of talking to Mayor Ginger Nelson from Amarillo. Ginger is a phenomenal leader and has been for a long time, and so it was fun to hear about her background growing up in a small town in West Texas, coming to Texas Tech, starting her law career, and ultimately becoming the mayor of Amarillo. One of the things I really appreciated, I think you will too, about this podcast is just how honest Ginger was about some of the challenges that she's experienced along with some of the other leaders in Amarillo as they've gone through this transition of leadership. And so I think you'll really enjoy this episode, and I certainly learned a lot. Really appreciate you being here. I've gotten to know you just a little bit. A few years ago now, you came to a young professional event with Drayton, and that was phenomenal. No offense to Mr. Pope, but it worked out great that he was out of town and you got to host that young professional event for us.
Dan knows I'm a better mayor than he is anyway.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how he feels about that. But for those listening who don't know much about you, you're the mayor of Amarillo, you live in Amarillo. Why don't you just share your story and your background and how you got to Amarillo and how you ended up mayor and what that's like and all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Panhandle in Spearman, and one of my claims to fame that I love to tell the story about is that my husband and I don't remember meeting. We've always known each other. Yes. And so we were both had the privilege of growing up in Spearman, truly just a quintessential small town growing up. Both of our parents were involved in the ag industry. My dad was also in oil and gas, and our moms had retail stores. And so we just got to see them juggle everything. And they were good at lots of things, but living small town, if you weren't involved in doing it, then it wasn't getting done. And so in a lot of ways that made Kevin and I really generalists. We played lots of sports. We did lots of outside activities and had a very full experience in that small town. And it really wasn't until I left Spearman that I realized it was a limited experience. It was before the internet, it was before YouTube, so
really not connected.
Really not connected at all. If it wasn't in Encyclopedia Britannica or on a limited cable channel, we just didn't have any exposure to it, which was fine. It's one of those things you don't know what you're missing until you actually know what you're missing. But one of the things that I look back on my childhood and just what I would tell my 20-year-old self, I would say take more risks because there's no downside to failing. Failure, it's all along a continuum of a timeline, so you're the one that gets to decide when you call it a fail. Well, just never call it a fail, keep swimming until you make something out of it that you can point to it and say that was a win. And so just coming out of that small town environment, truly out of the small pond into anything bigger, we both came to Texas Tech. Kevin came first. I followed him. Okay. So I didn't choose the school. I chose the guy. And that's worked out well for us, or at least for me it has. And
I bet you if he were on here, he would agree.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So then I got an advertising degree and a Spanish degree at Texas Tech, and we had a good time here. I worked hard so I could graduate the same time Kevin did. Cool. And then we went on to Dallas. He got a job at a Big Six accounting firm, and I started law school at SMU.
Okay.
And then that led us back to deciding we both wanted to do law school, and we could do that too for the price of one at Texas Tech. Okay. So we came back to Lubbock, and I finished law school.
I didn't know that part of your story. I was going to say, I didn't realize you had a law degree from SMU, but you left SMU and y'all came back to Lubbock. So that's awesome. So you got all kinds of Texas Tech running through.
Oh my goodness, we are oozing, and we have fabulous Texas Tech heritage. Both our parents graduated from Texas Tech. All of our siblings graduated from Texas Tech. And when you go down Kevin's side, all of his siblings married people who graduated from Texas Tech. And their parents all graduated from Texas Tech.
Not a lot of people, rooting for other teams when Tech's playing.
No. We bleed red and black at our house, and that is just fine.
That's great.
Kevin and I always knew we wanted to be entrepreneurs. That's what our parents were, doing lots of things, wearing lots of hats. And that's definitely how we've made our life in Amarillo, and Amarillo's been so good to
That's
us.
cool. And so did you go from Lubbock straight to Amarillo?
Yes,
Yeah.
we did. We wanted to be close to our parents, and we'd already gone off and done Dallas, and we're panhandle people.
Yeah.
We love the culture here, and we wanted to build something here.
That's cool.
So that's what we did, and I can't believe time flies by. That was over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And
It happens fast, doesn't
yeah,
it?
it does.
So how long have you been mayor?
So I'm in my second term as mayor in my third year.
Okay, that's awesome. And it's been a great experience. Exactly everything you thought it would be, harder, or all of it.
I really had no expectations because I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect to be in politics, and we just saw a need in our community for some solid leadership with a positive vision, and our community was just really thirsty for somebody that would come in and speak hope over our community. And so it was very scary to step into that arena, because politics right now is, and maybe always, I don't know, it's a quite toxic environment. And so to ask our family to step into that, and people say to us all the time, man, I would never do that. I can't believe you would do that. Why would you do that? And really the only reason that you can answer that is because we felt called by God to do that. Our faith is really important to us, and it's something we had prayed a lot about for our city, just to have strong godly leadership that speaks life over people, that creates an environment where everyone's viewpoint is respected and honored, even if it's not agreed with. And just in praying about that, the next thing you know, we felt called to step forward and be a part of that.
Yeah.
So that's, on the hard days, that's really the only way that you can
Get through
and
what you cling to. Yeah.
and justify it. And you miss things. I miss things for my kids, and so the cost is high. The cost of public service is high, and I don't see how anybody could do it for their ego or to build their resume, or even for the experience of it, even though that's worthwhile and enriching sometimes. We're doing it because we feel called, and we see a higher purpose in it.
Yeah, well, I think Amarillo's, and really Amarillo and the whole region are lucky to have you. And for two cities of such significance in a region like Amarillo and Lubbock, to have mayors like Dan and like you. I mean, I think we should be really grateful. And I think we think about looking back in the future. I think all of us will look back on this as just the fact that we're so lucky to have two really strong leaders in the Texas Panhandle at the exact same time, leading cities. When you think about leadership as a mayor, what do you feel like your primary role and responsibility is as a mayor, and the leader of the organization and the way that y'all city government runs? When you think of your role, what are the things that you think about in terms of your leadership?
The role of mayor is really the role of connector. So I might hear of this person doing this project, and then I'm out and about and I see of this person who has this need, and next thing you know, they're connected because the mayor knew about it, and the mayor had contacts and relationships and that whole web of all things in the city of Amarillo. So that's really the primary role. Now, through those connections, the mayor can sometimes drive change. And sometimes it takes that leadership to say, this is a problem, and we need to bring some people around a table who have different opinions, and let's start hammering out the solution for us in it. I really think at this point in time in politics, any elected official's role has got to be choosing that respect and honor culture development. Right now, we just live in such a culture of disdain, where the only way to put your viewpoint forward is to destroy the people around you, rather than be in an arena full of ideas. We're just cutting off the legs of anyone who presents an idea that doesn't agree with us. And I don't know if that happens because of our insecurity, or if it happens because we don't have the communication skills to actually put forth our idea in a way that we can convince and advocate others to join us. But either way, we have to have leaders who will step forward and will lead into the idea that we're better because we have different ideas, and that coming to the table with an idea is just part of the process. And the idea gets better the more people that add onto it and the more fingerprints that touch it, then it's a better idea.
Yeah, that's really good.
So
Has that been hard for you? Like, coming from, kind of the business world and owning your own, your own practice and your own business into an environment where really, the whole is more successful when you are more collaborative and more, has that been a difficult process?
It's been very hard for me.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of growing just as an entrepreneur. We've always owned our own business, whether it was a hotel industry. We own My Place Hotels here in Amarillo, and we have one in Lubbock also. We have a downtown office building. Obviously, we make the decisions for that community as well, and then our law practice. So, yeah, that's been a skill that I've had to try and learn, and it's stretching me a lot. And then you combine that too just in the, government is fairly inefficient. Bureaucracy is a real thing. There's a reason we have disdain toward bureaucracy and how it slows things down. So learning how to operate in that kind of environment with a larger team, and you have to operate under things like the Open Meetings Act, where I have a council of 5 people, and that means I can only talk to one other person unless we're sitting in the council room in front of everybody. So it means you have to be a different kind of leader. You can't lead behind the scenes and then come together with it all presented nice and pretty. It has to happen ugly sometimes out there on the table, and then that leads to a headline, and that's all kinds of social media chaos. And then you're dealing with the fallout rather than actually implementing a solution. So how you manage all of that time and energy
what are some of the things you've
challenging.
done to learn how to address that? Because I'm a complete control freak. So just like the challenge of really seeking out differing viewpoints and collaborating and different ideas. Like how have you nurtured that new skill set in this particular position?
I'm not naturally a communicator. I'm an introvert by nature. And so I call, Kevin laughs, I'm a communications camel. I can go a long time without feeling uncomfortable for touches or communications. And so for me, it is being intentional about communicating. And so reaching out and trying to think around corners and think, okay, this is the problem I'm talking about today, but 2 weeks from now, that problem is going to morph into this and involve these people. And so the sooner I can think and look around the corner communications wise and get them at the table, and just the power of an intentional communication, whether that's a text that says, I was thinking about you today, I know you had your big presentation to this group, or saw this happening around town and know you've been working on that for a year. Just thoughtful. That part of it is not hard. It's the execution of finding time to actually make all those touch points. When I was first elected mayor, I sat down with Betsy Price. She's the mayor of Fort Worth, and she's in her 5th term as mayor now. So I just came with a list. I had a notebook page and a half full of questions, and she was so generous, gave me an hour and a half of her time. And I just asked question after question after question. And one of the things I took away from that meeting, she said, the more you can be with the people you represent, the fewer problems you will have to manage. And she's naturally an extrovert, so she loves being out and all the people, but she's right. The more time you spend just listening to people, then they tell you what issues are coming, and then you can begin to be intentional about getting people around the table, whether it's forming a task force or whether it's just inviting 4 or 5 people to come to lunch and say, let's talk about this openly, and build some relationships around it. Communication is absolutely the key, whether it's happening publicly or behind the scenes. It's the currency of power these days.
That's really good. You said something, when we first started, that there's no downside to failure. And so one of my questions for you is how, you've personally handled failure.
Yeah.
So whether that's in your personal life or, the private sector or, as mayor, how have you tried, or how do you personally on a day-to-day basis approach failure?
So after serving the first year as mayor, it was a really hard year. A lot of learning curve for me personally, but a lot of learning curve too just in the city. We turned over our entire council. So all 5 of us were brand new, had never had any city government experience, and our city manager was new. He'd only been on staff about 3 months. And so everything was new, and nothing was in sync. And we were stubbing our toe. It's sort of like, when you first start to ride a bicycle, those first 2 or 3 turns, everything's wobbly. Well, that was what it was the first year. It was so hard. And at the end of the first year, I thought I need a better strategy for how we handle recovering from mistakes, how I recover handling from mistakes, and how we handle criticism. And so I just sat down and I wrote out a written strategy. So I have a mistake strategy. And at the top of it, it says, who am I and how does a person like me respond when I make mistakes? And so I just thought, I need to have a plan for how I'm going to handle that, because I keep making mistakes. And if I want to be resilient through them, I need to know what I'm going to do. Yeah. And then I asked the same question about criticism. Who am I and how does a person like me respond to criticism? And so I have a written strategy for how I will respond to criticism. The mistake strategy is pretty short. It's just 3 points. The criticism strategy is 8 or 9 points and much more difficult to implement, actually.
That's very good.
But one of my main takeaways from that criticism is that receiving criticism is a skill. And just like playing the violin or shooting hoops, you get better at it the more you practice it. And so it can feel painful to practice receiving criticism, but it's just a skill. And you're better at it, the better you can receive it, the better you are as a leader.
That's phenomenal. That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. How do you approach personal growth? You got all these things pulling at you. You got children, you got marriage, you got private business, you're mayor of a city that's not a small city. And so you have all these things, all these responsibilities, all these commitments. So how do you approach your own personal growth? How do you stay empowered and inspired? Like, what's that look like for you?
Yeah. Everybody says, well, how do you keep balance? Blah, blah, blah. I don't, it's, so let's just right up front, especially for every woman who's in a leadership or working outside the home mom position. Let me just tell you, it does not happen. Only Linda Carter was Wonder Woman. There's no such thing as the perfect. It all happens in a balance. So some weeks are better than others, and sometimes I get too little sleep, and then I have to try and catch up and all that. But I love reading. I devour books about leadership, and my quiet time is really important because I am an introvert. I have to recharge on that. And so I'm not a morning person, but in this season of my life, my alarm goes off usually 4:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And it's just because I have to have that time where I pray and get centered and just regroup. And reading the Bible is really important for me in doing that. So reading those leadership books, having my quiet time, and making sure I don't drop. If I drop balls, which inevitably I do because I have so many in the air, not my kids and not my husband, because I'm uniquely called to meet those roles, and I can't delegate those.
That's good. Thanks for sharing that. When you find yourself out of balance, which it sounds like is often,
yeah.
what do you do to rebalance to the greatest degree you can? I mean, I totally resonate with what you're saying. Maybe there is no such thing as balance, but how do you know, like, what are the trigger points for you when okay, I'm left or right of center here? So, what are those trigger points? What do you do to kind of draw back to the middle?
Yeah. Sleep for me is a big one. Yeah. So if I've been running several nights on only 4 hours of sleep, then I know
I've been running too hot.
Yeah, exactly. So just sitting down, I'm a big list maker. And so I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, this is what has to be done. And then I feel better if I can see it on a list. I give myself permission to do it next week.
Right.
But it's just something about capturing it so I'm not afraid of losing it. So I know for some people, the list just becomes like an idol and they just get consumed by it. For me, it's a great offloading tool. So when I feel overwhelmed, I will sit down and make a list, and then I can divide it up, divide and conquer it. I can assign days to it and deadlines, and then I'm better.
That's good. Yeah, I think a lot of leaders aren't self-aware enough to know when they are out of balance, and so they end up just like kind of living on a hamster wheel. And so I love that approach. I mean, I think sleep is really underrated, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up. That's good. How do you like practically manage your time? Like you sounds like you're a to-do person. So you're a traditionalist and you like pen and paper. You have some fancy app that you use. Do you have an assistant that like kind of manages your schedule? Like how do you approach managing time given all the responsibilities that you have?
I'm constantly trying new things because efficiency is one of my core values.
Okay.
So I hate wasting time. But really, when it comes down to for me, is I have designed my own form, my own day timer type form
Cool.
that I print off, and it's a week at a time, and it's one page front and back. And usually at the end of my prayer time every day, I sit, make some notes on that, and I know how I'm going to attack it. I mean, I think everybody pretty much uses a digital schedule these days,
Yeah.
and I have to because so many people touch my schedule and have access to it and help me manage it. So I run my calendar off my phone, but some events I do sit down and put onto that paper.
That's cool.
Mainly things like when I think I've got to have time to read this book or read this report or summarize my speech notes. Things like that don't land on my digital calendar. They land on my daily to-do time frame.
That's
and
cool.
that time frame starts at 4 a.m. and goes all the way till 11 p.m. And so, like one day I counted, I had 18 meetings that day as the mayor. So not every day is like
Sure.
that, but some
But a
days
lot
are
of
just
them,
bonkers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's admirable, and it's probably why a lot of people only do it 2 or 3 terms.
It is true.
'Cause
Yeah.
at some point you just
It's
go
intense.
Like,
Yeah. And the thing about the mayor's job is it's just 24/7. And, according to polling, 90% of people in Amarillo know who I am. And so
Wow.
that was something that was unexpected for Kevin and I and our family, was that
just to go anywhere.
the notoriety,
Yeah.
it changes things. And so it means that we're serving when we're at the grocery store, we're serving at church on Sunday morning. We're constantly serving, and it's a joy. It really is a joy and a privilege, but
But you're human, and it can also be
Yeah.
very difficult.
yeah.
Do you ever struggle with like the fact that 90% of people in your city know you? Do you ever struggle with feeling the success too much or feeling the failure too much? I mean, because you can't hide. I mean, unless you leave town,
Yeah.
it's really hard not to be known based on what you just said.
Yeah.
And so is that really hard to stay level, to not be too high or not to be too low at any given moment because of all the activity and all the things happening to you all at once?
So right back to that criticism strategy for me, there's constant reminders that I'm making tons of mistakes all the time. So I don't ever feel that important because I know how many mistakes I'm making. So I keep a sign in my office from this last campaign. There was a very public group of people who put signs out all over town that said anybody but Ginger Nelson for mayor. And the first time I saw that sign, it was a real blow. It was just it's sort of like Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So that first sign, the business owners they don't have permission to put that out there. They're taking it down to put it in the trash. I said, hey, we put that in my car. Can I have that? They said, sure. And I keep it in my office now as a reminder to me that I'm not doing this for anyone's approval. And so if somebody thinks I'm doing a great job, that's nice, but it's not why I'm doing it. If somebody thinks I'm doing a terrible job, well, I'm disappointed to hear that, but that's not why I'm doing it. And my identity is not tied to it. The value of who I am as a person is not tied to some performance poll or a public opinion poll about what kind of job I'm doing. I want to pay attention to those things because I represent voters and voters matter. But my identity is grounded in the fact that I'm made in the image of God and Jesus died for me, and I know how the end of my story will go. I'm going to spend eternity in heaven. And so whether I fail today miserably as the mayor or succeed amazingly as the mayor doesn't change my value as a person. Nothing I do today is going to, or don't do today, is going to make God love me any more or any less. And operating off of that platform gives me a tremendous amount of confidence and freedom as a leader to succeed, but also to fail. And one of the things I've picked up the most out of this, I don't know who said it, but somewhere it stuck with me, that God allows you to be baptized by criticism in order to be inoculated against praise. And as a leader, you want to be right there in the middle, able to receive both, but not hindered by either praise or criticism.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. I hate to move on from that because that it would be fun to unpack that. My last question for you is, two more questions for you. So first one is like, who have been some of the biggest personal influences on your own leadership? You mentioned that you love to read, so maybe it's an author, or maybe it's a mentor you've had, or maybe it's your parents. You spoke a lot about them, but who are a few of those people who have had a tremendous influence on you?
Absolutely. My parents are a big influencers. I'm so grateful for them. They're still very involved in my life. But my husband, hands down, is the most impactful leader in my life and the one who's taught me the most about leadership. And there have been a couple of dark days even serving as mayor. One day I said, that's it, I quit. And he said, really? Really? You're going to quit? And so just the way he challenges me and his leadership and wisdom are really, really deep. So I just can't imagine where I would be without his leadership and the way that he challenges me and supports me and teaches me still.
That's good. That's great. All right. What would the Ginger now, who has experienced all this successes and losses, what would she tell the Ginger 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. What would you learn?
Absolutely, it would be take more risks. Mm-hmm. Think higher, think bigger. You can come up with a plan and you think, wow, that feels dangerous or that feels outside my comfort zone. Well, growth only happens outside your comfort zone. And so I think setting your targets higher and being willing to only get to 80% of them still means that you are probably going to go further than if you just set that target where you thought you could achieve it at the beginning. And if you're not feeling vulnerable, you're probably not being used, because if you're just relying on what you think you can accomplish, then you're cutting God out of the equation 100%. And it's only when you're way over your skis is he going to come along beside you and equip you to do a work you never dreamed you could do. And believe me, that is the small town spearman introvert Ginger Nelson saying, I never would have seen myself able to serve in this role. And it's so rewarding getting to work with the people, and it's so challenging getting to work with the people. But I'm so grateful that God opened the door and gave us the chance to do it.
Yeah, this is good. Really, really appreciate you doing this, and I know you're super busy, so really grateful you take time to be with us.
Thank you. I know y'all are busy too. I'm glad it worked.